Good afternoon and welcome to today's Lightning Lunch session. Whether you are watching as we are streaming live or whether you watch at a later date, perhaps in class or at home, we hope you find this session useful and feel free to explore the rest of the Lightning Lunch series on our website and see what other sessions you can get involved in. A few things to mention before we get started. For those joining us live, we are delivering today's session in a Zoom webinar. So we cannot see you or hear you. You don't need to worry about your camera or your microphone. The session will be recorded, but you won't be visible in this. If you want to ask any questions as we go along today live, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, and you can ask questions anonymously. However, as I say, if you're watching at a later date and you have questions as you're watching the session, you can email them to us. If you email outreach@ljmu.ac.uk, that will come through to me, or you can email courses@ljmu.ac.uk. Either way, if your question is related to the session and the programme, I can get in touch with our speakers to have that question answered. So today's session is with Dr. Claire Horrocks and Dr. B. Hughes from our Media, Culture and Communication programme. And they're joining us to talk us through the impact of COVID-19 on the media, cultural and creative industries. So I will stop sharing there. And Claire, is that okay if I pass over to you?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Chris. So welcome to everybody. As Chris said, I work within the Media, Culture and Communications department with my colleague B, who is also here today. So today, as Chris said, we're going to be thinking about the impact of COVID on the media, culture and communication industries. As this has been a topic that's been discussed greatly by our level 4, level 5 and level 6 students coming in. I think we've all been impacted in some way, but no more than across some of our cultural industries. So what we wanted to do today was to give you a flavour of what you would be studying if you were studying either the Media, Culture and Communication or English and Media and Cultural Studies programmes with us. By identifying some of the current hot topics on COVID, we will discuss some of the modules that you'll be studying at level 4 if you come into us, and how we're starting to address some of these issues with our students. And we'll then start to map those debates across a number of our modules. And usually we find that gives us a good level of discussion. So as Chris said, we're open to questions either today, or do feel free to send an email to Outreach marked for either myself or B to have a look at. So I'll hand over to B to go through this next slide with you.
Thanks, Claire. One of the kind of welcome tasks that we do with our students at the moment is around thinking and getting us in the mode for thinking about the cultural industries, creative industries, and we have been kind of looking specifically at the impact of COVID. Because our course covers, as Claire said, many aspects of the media and cultural industries. And the course team all work or have worked in these industries or research them in some way. And as we all know, COVID has had a huge impact across culture and society, and everybody and every industry has had to adapt quickly and adapt lots of times. And we all know the impact it's had on our everyday life, from social distancing to face coverings to all the different restrictions that are placed on us. So we start our first year off by asking our students to think about how these changes have also impacted the media and cultural industries in different ways. And here are some of the questions that we ask you to look at. And the idea is to give you kind of a flavour for what you're going to encounter next, the sorts of ideas, the sorts of sources, industries, and the sorts of research you'll be engaging with during your time with us. And we do a little bit of an activity so that you get a chance to meet your new classmates, to consider a range of different information sources to find out about the impact of COVID. So last year, we looked at the impact of it on lots of different areas. For example, popular music, classical music, film, TV, comedy, theatre, museums, and loads more. And we looked at a range of different sources that you may be familiar with or not, from government documents and press releases the House of Commons debate, the newspaper reports, both like national and local press. We looked at professional bodies and associations and funding bodies, for example, the BFI, so that's the British Film Institute, and places like the Art Fund. We also looked at specialist reports. For example, here in Liverpool, there's a magazine called Budolito that is a kind of looks at the Liverpool music scene and academic research that was emerging at the time. And Budolito actually commissioned a report which they worked on with the University of Liverpool into COVID's impact on the local music industry. So that's a really useful kind of sort of document for us to engage with. So you can see there's lots of different sources that tell us about the impact that COVID has had on our kind of area of interest and the ways that media and cultural industries have had to adapt. So I think I'm going to hand over to Claire now to look at a specific example.
So I'm going to start with something that those of you who are studying media A-level will perhaps be more familiar with, and that's the interruption to our television schedules. And this will pick up on some of the audience work that you've been doing for A-level media in particular. And that was Saturday Night Takeaway, moving to a no studio audience, starting to think about the impact that this has on the production values, but also the cultural experience of viewing. So we perhaps take some of those production issues from the A-level media syllabus a little further and start to think about some of those more intangible areas like consumption and the experience when that's shared with other viewers. And this leads us into a number of the documentations and debates that Bea was just touching upon, and starting to think about the responses that were made from a report that came out from Ofcom in August of 2020. And what we start to see is that from very early on in the lockdown last year, the public service broadcasters still retained high TV viewing. And this initially reversed the trend of long-term decline in viewing. This started to see more of an investment in some of those traditional, what we would usually call the terrestrial channels. And what was particularly interesting was that the BBC was the most popular source of news and information, something that very much cuts across those debates about broadcast versus print that you may have been having a look at. So that idea of who we trust for giving us information in a crisis has been something that's particularly interesting, and which some of our students at dissertation have been looking at over this past academic year. So in the summer last year of June 2020, public service broadcasting combined monthly shares of broadcast TV viewing fell to 55%. Now, this impact in the disruption to production is something that we consider when we're starting to look at the scheduling. So there are certain programs that are associated with particular times of the year. We know it's autumn when Strictly Come Dancing begins. We know we're moving into the winter and spring when Call the Midwife starts. Now, what's quite interesting is that some of those schedules have been disrupted, and so have the means of production. Strictly advertised itself last year as getting back to normal, bringing us something that the nation needed. And I think this starts to tap into some of those issues that you will be looking at if you're doing A-level communication and culture. The idea about the narratives that surround production of media texts for television. From June 2020 onwards, though, consumption of streaming massively increases. And this is something that we do on our modules. I've been teaching this semester with our first year students on media institutions and audiences, starting to think about the rise of things like cable television, some of the power of Amazon Prime, Netflix, and how they've been responding to the crisis. So as Bea said before, there's a lot about policy that we can touch on, but also that cultural aspect of how we communicate those changes and how we negotiate those changes across social media, for example. So one of our modules that we have, which is at the start of level 5, is analysing entertainment media. And this starts to pick up on the work of media institutions and audiences, starting to look at issues around celebrity and fandom, and also the rise of hybrid television genres. And I think that this is particularly true when we're looking at the response to COVID. The regular means of production have been shifted, so we've had to adapt in the same way that we've adapted with our teaching and learning. And I'm sure that's the same for you guys at college as well. We've got this much more blended learning approach. And so television has started to adapt to this level of hybridity too. As I said, I think that research on post-network brands like Netflix and Amazon Prime provide some really interesting material. And again, these topics that we introduce, which come in quite clearly from your A-level classes at level 4, are then picked up and developed by some of our students conducting their own independent research for dissertations at level 6. So another area that we have a look at across level 4 is cinema.
Yeah, so I'm sure a number of you will be really interested in film and cinema from various different angles. So this is one of our first year level 4 semester 1 core modules. So it's a really great one that introduces you to the idea of researching and analysing kind of screen industries and cinema. So the first part of the module focuses on the history and the development of cinema. So some of you kind of might have some knowledge about that already. Some of you might be kind of completely new to studying cinema and researching cinema. So it's really useful. So we do things like highlighting key theories, ideas, and filmmaking techniques that kind of feed into these different movements around cinema and its development, while also thinking about its context in a much broader social, cultural, and political sense. The second half of the module deals with contemporary issues, and this is where things like the COVID crisis might come in. Kind of linking to our theme for today, there was a recent industry report supported by multiple international film associations, which came out the year before the pandemic in 2019, which stated that global expenditure on screen production, which sort of includes scripted films, but also television and documentary, but doesn't include sport, news or adverts. So you can see there's like things that are in and out of these different categories. So it was reached $177 billion. So it's a huge global industry. And it's a huge sector which employs and drives lots of employment, creating around 14 million full-time equivalent jobs in the year before the pandemic, which is, it's vast, it's a huge industry. And we saw with the shutdown that came with COVID-19, just kind of filming and production, there was a loss of around 10 million screen sector full-time equivalent jobs, which is huge. Barely imagine that that impact will have had socially, culturally, and kind of on the industry. Though, thankfully, that impact is temporary, because we can see that production has been able to resume. And that this is happening quite quickly, despite the various interruptions where, some filming has resumed, for example, the new Batman films, but have had to be kind of paused again because some of the cast or crew down with COVID. So there's lots of different stuff that we can think about relating to cinema and linking to our current social and political context. So if we can skip on to the next.
I'm trying to.
Okay. Smooth as ever. There we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about journalism and professional writing, which I think is a brilliant module for us in media and cultural communication, because it's really kind of skills focused, future focused, jobs focused. So it's a module where you'll produce lots of different types of writing that will be really valuable to you moving forward, particularly if you want to kind of work in these areas. And it's something that not all kind of media, culture and comms and cultural studies courses offer. It's really practical. So you can see on the left, there are lots of different things that you're going to be producing as part of that module. So we have a news story that's kind of developed from a press conference, a review of a cultural venue in Liverpool, a feature article on something that interests you specifically. You'll develop a podcast script, and then we'll ask you to reflect on it. So you can see how we're getting you to engage with lots of different forms of writing that kind of gives you lots of different kind of balls that you can draw on later. So, you know, you're going to be able to write as a professional, move away from writing just for ourselves to thinking about different audiences, using different forms of journalism, thinking about those needs of those different audiences. People that listen to podcasts might want very different things to people that read news stories on, for example, the BBC News website, or even people that look at things like the local press, like the Liverpool Echo. And it will help you to understand how these industries interact and kind of compete, and enable you to really reflect on how you're developing those skills, which is really helpful, really important. And one of the hardest things that we ever have to do is self-reflection. So hand over back to you, Claire.
Thanks. And as Bea was saying, I think some of the issues that we're touching upon on these modules very much will be developing work that you're doing on the A-level curriculum, whether you are looking at A-level media or whether you're doing A-level communication and culture. Having said that, what's also quite interesting is the variety of backgrounds that our students come in with. So if you're studying English language, for example, we find that quite often those students also do very well on this course because of some of those more creative aspects that they can become involved with too. So to develop this and to start to consider other industries that are affected by COVID, one of the modules that both Bea and I teach on is the Introduction to Media Culture and Creative Industries, and our focus on that is travel and leisure. This slide is taken from, as we can see in the bottom left-hand corner, a talk that was given to our students by Oliver Broad, who is a co-managing director of an independent travel company, Robert Broad Travel, which is based in Lichfield. Oliver is actually one of our alumni, and we quite often have students who come back as professionals, as experts within the media, culture and creative industries to talk to our students about how they have developed within their careers as a result of taking the degree with us at John Moores, and to help us get students to understand some of those transitions from curriculum, from what we might be studying in theory, to practice. And I think that's really crucial when we're starting to think about the end product, about being a graduate and going on and undertaking research and developing skills in some of these areas we've been studying. So travel is very much still a hot topic. You know, will international travel be allowed from May the 17th? Today's news, the NHS app will be used as a form of travel visa for those people who have or have not had the COVID vaccine. So certainly some quite contentious issues that are emerging even as we're doing this talk today. And this might be something that you want to pick up with your tutors in seminar groups. But what's quite interesting, Oliver said to us, is that sort of sense of having to firefight at the beginning, at the start of the pandemic in 2020. But as things settled down in the summer, there was the feeling that we could move forward with travel and that representations of travel could start to give out more positive messages. However, briefings from the government, if you remember what Bea said earlier about looking at policy as well as cultural representation, what we found was that actually rather than things improving within travel, we were getting mixed messages. So as things slowed down moving towards the end of 2020, there was the hope that the industry would be able to move back to more positive communication, more positive marketing, with January, February being one of the highlights within the calendar for travel agents. This is the time after Christmas, in the darker winter, when we start to say, let's have a look at a holiday. However, the messages that were delivered by government were very much against this. So another key period within the timing of booking travel, within that period where people are looking for escape, which is very much what we find within the advertisements for travel, what we find is messages coming across that tell us going on holiday is currently illegal. Stay at home, save lives. And you can see that's there from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So at the time that these messages are coming out, what we are finding is how damaging that this is to our cultural industries that are relying on travel, some of those areas who are relying on tourism. One of our current level 6 students is from Greece, and his hope was that he was returning home to work within this sector, doing marketing. However, as part of his final year portfolio, he's been looking at how devastated the Greek economy has been, in particular due to the decline of the tourism industry. So it's starting to think about some of these diverse cultural perspectives and wondering how those responses can be handled, both by people from within the media sector, which is why I've included all of his slides here today, but also then myself and Bea look at things like social media, blogs and vlogs, and how people are responding more personally to some of these challenges. So the holiday industry produced their own poster, their own parody of the government poster. Booking a holiday is currently legal. Stay at home, save lives, and have something to look forward to. So there's been some quite interesting hashtags around hope and travel, giving us that hope for escapism. So one of our final modules now that we'll just touch upon, which will leave you with some questions for discussion, hopefully, and we'd love to hear from you either in the question and answer today or via the outreach email that Chris outlined at the beginning, is our study and culture module.
Yeah, so this is another one of our first semester modules, one that I teach on and I really enjoy. It's one of my favourite modules because it gives us all the tools that we need to figure out what we actually mean by studying culture. And we examine a really broad range of cultural forms and practices as part of the module. So Tony Purvis gives a set of examples that shows this and what they can tell us. So these different cultural forms might be films, novels, television programs, shopping habits, listening to music, visiting an art gallery, fashion, architecture, all of these different things. And Purvis says, suggest something about what it means to live according to the politics of a specific society at any one point in history. So, it's really important that we bear that in mind. All these different things tell us specific things about specific times and places. Studying culture has also often involved the study of subcultures, which are identities and groups who are seen and see themselves as being different from the mainstream, whether that's by way of how you look or choose to look, what you do with your time, the values and interests that you have, or a combination of these and other factors. So subcultures is a really, really rich area of study for us. Thinking about the pandemic, one cultural practice for those who do it and go to it are live performances of all different kinds that have been really severely affected. Sharon Jeannot has done some really great recent brand new research, you can see on the slide there, published just this year, about the impact of this. And Jeannot says that artists can count on people to tune in artists cannot count on people to tune into their Instagram or Facebook pages every day, nor can venues from concert halls to art galleries to cinemas survive without fresh live performances and exhibitions. So one example of how subcultures, their status in relation to the mainstream and the cultural industries have been affected by the pandemic is the most recent second series of Rupaul's Drag Race UK. So the filming of the series was forced to stop for months midway through due to the 2020 lockdown restrictions, which delayed its TV transmission. But more importantly, this left the contestants unable to continue with the series while their usual gigs as drag performers were also stopped. So you can see there was a huge kind of amount of disruption to this, not just the kind of TV schedule and the filming schedule, but also the kind of outside lives and kind of incomes of the people that were part of the show. So this meant, as I've said, financial difficulties for some. For example, Ellie Diamond, who is pictured there on the slide, returned to working as a drive-through server at McDonald's, while other contestants like Joe Black had to sell their costumes to raise money to live on, which of course then meant that going back to earning a living through drag performance further down the line would cost more money. As we know, you can't just you can create drag out of anything if you've seen any of the challenges on the show, but you're not able to kind of replace things as easily because it's very expensive. So other future implications are the difficulties this now poses for the Series 2 contestants' tour of UK venues, and under what conditions that will be able to go ahead, even though tickets are already on sale. So even though they're selling the tickets in hopes that it will go ahead, we don't know what restrictions might be on live performances and venues when it comes to that time. So one of the areas of interest for us on Study and Culture might well be not only how will cultural industries where the live experience is vital to recover, but what social and cultural groups will be affected by that, and whether artists representing subcultures will end up further marginalised. And it highlights the precarious nature of earning a living in the gig economy, as well as kind of particularly thinking about the position of young people already on the margins in these kind of insecure roles and in kind of sort of less stable employment roles, I suppose. So what we're keen to do on Study and Culture is look at the power dynamics and political implications of this. So which cultural industries get support and which don't? Which cultural groups, cultural practices are impacted in different ways. So this year we spent quite a lot of time thinking about how students were impacted specifically as well. So relating back to kind of Drag Race, for example, we might think about how the social backgrounds of certain performers mean they're more vulnerable to hardship, and how different forms of culture and cultural industry are valued by government versus how they're valued by audiences. So I'm sure we're aware that those are two very different things. So I'm going to pass back to Claire and we'll go into our discussion topics.
So lots to think about, which we can respond to now if people want to pose any sort of questions in our Q&A box, as Chris indicated at the beginning, or we'll leave you with a few sort of debates and topics that you may want to work through with your tutors and have a chat. I think one thing that both B and I would say is that showing that you're engaged with some of these issues when you're writing your personal statement and applying for courses at university is key for us understanding the kind of student that you are and the environment in which you're interested in thriving in. So have a think about some of these hot topics, and I will hand over to Chris as our convener to see if there's any questions that need to be answered, or if you would like to contact us directly.
Thank you both so much. Sorry, my computer was going a bit funny then. That was really fascinating. I can see we don't have any questions in the Q&A box, so I'll just keep an eye on that. I'll share a slide as we finish up. So we hope you found today's webinar useful. It's sort of eye-opening, I guess. You kind of realise how widely the impact has been felt by COVID-19, but to kind of show, to look back at how many industries have been affected, it is really shocking. So I've found it really interesting, and I'm sure our students watching back will get some good conversations out of it. So if you want to find out more about our Lightning Lunch sessions, there is a link on the slide, which is quite a long, wordy link. If you Google LJMU Lightning Lunch sessions, you'll probably find it a bit easier. We've got a new webpage on our website for students, our Moving Forward microsite, which will tell you how the university are dealing with things like COVID-19 in particular, and how we're planning for the next academic year. And as we've said throughout, if you have any questions following watching back the recording of today's session, if you email them to myself and the team I work in at outreach@ljmu.ac.uk, either your questions or your thoughts or how your conversations went on this topic, then I'm happy to pass those on to both Claire and B and feed that back. But for now, I think that's everything. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.